Howdy folks, hope you've all had a great weekend and welcome to another episode of Mingles with Jingles. And I've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about this week. It's like the polar opposite of last week where I just didn't have a clue what I was going to be talking about this week. All kinds of subjects to cover, some of which, or at least the first of which, related to what we were talking about last week, about how games publishers, I nearly said developers, or sometimes developers when the developers are the publishers. Yes, Gaijin Entertainment, we are talking about you. Or we're going to be. But yes, when the game's publishers... Well, last week we were talking about the history and the current state of games publishers basically being scumbags. Just trying to screw you as subtly as they possibly can until it becomes impossible for you to pretend that you're not being screwed anymore. Of course, there was the by now legendary incident in Star Wars Battlefront 2 when Electronic Arts thought, screw this subtlety business. They just rammed all 6 inches in without even bothering to lube up first and ruined it for all of the other games publishers. Gaijin Entertainment, however, the developers and publishers of War Thunder, have always been a little bit more subtle than the likes of Electronic Arts, just gradually slipping it in by increments via the tradesman's entrance, well, ever since War Thunder was a thing. Actually, to be completely honest, there was a time when Gaijin Entertainment and War Thunder did try to stick the whole 6 inches in without lubing up first. I'm thinking back to the incident that caused me to quit War Thunder in outrage. It was during one of the Steam summer sales, a few years ago now. I can't remember the exact specifics, it was a long time ago. I should probably look it up. I can't be bothered. I'll just give you a general summary. So, Steam summer sales coming up. And War Thunder has always sold vehicle packages within the game. Nothing wrong with that. It's a free-to-play game. They've got to have a way of selling you something after all. And I think it was the P51D Mustang package. And with this Steam Summer Sale coming up, the P51D Mustang package was put on sale. And people noticed something strange about the price of the package. Doesn't seem like a sale price. It seems actually slightly more expensive than it was just the month before the sale. What's going on? So people started asking questions, and Gaijin responded in the way that Gaijin always respond and started swinging the ban hammer at anybody who brought up the subject of the suspiciously expensive price of what was supposed to be an on-sale package during the Steam Summer Sale. You see, in order for something to qualify as being on sale during a Steam sale, it must be listed at a price that was lower than the price it was listed for on Steam the month previously, or something like that. So what Gaijin had done, and again, I'm not entirely sure of the specifics here, but it went something along the lines of right before the Steam Summer Sale, they'd taken this particular package and then they'd increased the price for just a couple of days right before the sale. And then they'd lowered the price, so it would then count as being on sale, because it was cheaper than it had been the week before. But they lowered the price down to a price point that was actually more expensive than it had been before they jacked the price up in order to artificially qualify as being on sale. And so when people pointed this out, Gaijin started banning their accounts on the forums and just lied about it, said, no, this is bullshit, you're all criminals. But what Gaijin failed to take into account was the fact that the internet remembers. Right? There are price tracking websites that people could go to and say, look, there's the proof. You lying scumbags. So they got caught red-handed and then just tried to lie their way out of it. And it was absolutely outrageous. And it's the reason why I quit playing War Thunder myself. To be fair to Gaijin, their CEO, president, whoever, the guy in charge, the one who publicly denounced anybody pointing this out as being a liar, he did appear to learn his lesson over the following years. Although in truth, the lesson that he learned was probably don't get caught. But certainly in public, either he'd been sent on some kind of community relations course, or the PR people at Gaijin were the ones actually writing his public statements. Either way, stuff calmed down a bit. And Gaijin did get a lot better, or certainly no worse, at community relations. The thing about War Thunder, though, it's always been an exceptionally grindy game. War Thunder's always been one of those games where The developers, the publisher, I mean it's the same person, it's both Gaijin Entertainment, have always been quite happy to manufacture problems in order to sell your solutions, and in War Thunder it's been the grind. If you weren't prepared to play 400 games in order to advance to the next battle tier, then you could always just buy some golden eagles in the shop and then convert some experience and advance that way. It's always been really, really grindy. But it wasn't quite so grindy that the community were going to outright revolt over it. I mean, they muttered, they grumbled, they complained, but generally speaking, it was never quite bad enough for people to start lighting the torches and wielding the pitchforks. Gaijin had apparently mastered the art of slipping it in by increments, just gently enough that people were happy to pretend that they weren't being fucked. Until the latest patch. They just had to go that one step too far when they announced some changes to the economy that were going to make an already monumentally grindy game even more grindy than before. At that point, the War Thunder community could no longer pretend that that rhythmic slapping noise coming from behind them wasn't the sound of Gaijin butt-fucking them. And, oh boy, things got ugly. The game got review bombed. The community rebelled, not for the first time and certainly not for the last time, and Gaijin immediately went into damage control mode, rolling back the economic changes and issuing a statement explaining how they have to tie economic changes into the free-to-play mechanics and monetization in a free-to-play title and blah-de-blah-de-blah. But the thing is, they blamed it all on, wait for it, this is going to sound awfully familiar to anybody who's played a wargaming title. They put the blame for everything on miscommunication. No, we didn't do anything wrong, even though we've immediately just rolled back the thing that got everybody so upset. We weren't wrong to roll that out in the first place, we were just wrong in the way that we communicated it to you. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Meanwhile, Blizzard Activision, not to be outdone. The one thing you can always rely on in the world of games publishing is that anytime a smaller games publisher screws something up, you can always rely on one of the bigger publishers in the same week to come out with a monumental hold my beer. Blizzard Activision and Overwatch 2. You know, given the events of the past couple of years, it might be hard to believe, but there was a time when Blizzard could do no wrong. And I don't mean people were prepared to forgive them their mistakes. I mean, they literally never did anything wrong. Every game that they pushed out was a masterpiece, and it just worked. And they were always well supported, and there were never really any major game-breaking bugs. Everything just kind of worked fresh out of the box. I mean, when everything came on CD-ROMs and floppy drives, it kind of had to. With the internet being what it was in the 90s and the early 2000s, you couldn't just say, screw it, release it now, we'll patch it later. That wasn't going to fly. But Blizzard didn't do things that way because they had no alternative. They did it that way because they genuinely had a passion for creating great games. And then they merged with Activision. That's kind of where the rot set in. Early on, Activision Blizzard realised, and this is just one of the many scummy things that they did, was that people would be quite happy to work for Blizzard at less than the standard industry rate. They didn't care that they weren't getting paid properly, they were just happy to be working for Blizzard. That's the kind of loyalty that the Blizzard brand had. People just wanted the opportunity to work for what was widely considered the best games developer on the planet. The thing is, when you're not really paying people properly, that kind of employee loyalty doesn't last very long. Especially when you post record profits and then in the same week announce the layoff of 800 of those super loyal employees. And then a month later announce bonuses for company executives way in excess of any savings that you might have made by firing those 800 employees in the first place. It never used to be this way. I mean, it famously never used to be this way. Let me just give you an example of how Blizzard interacted with their community prior to the Activision merger and then after the Activision merger. So years back, at one of the BlizzCons, there was a Q&A panel with the developers. Somebody stood up to ask a question. He was wearing a red shirt. That will be important later. Some of you probably already know what I'm talking about here, the red shirt guy. So, red shirt guy stood up to ask his question. The microphone was shoved in front of his face, and it was immediately apparent that this guy was not comfortable in social situations, let's just put it that way. And the question that he had to ask was so irredeemably nerdy. Right? He was asking about some kind of inconsistency within the lore of the Wildhammer Dwarf clan in World of Warcraft. And nobody laughed at him. The developers took his question seriously. They didn't have an answer for him there and then, but they promised to investigate and get back to him. Nobody laughed at him. They took him seriously. They treated him with respect. And then every year at BlizzCon, Red Shirt Guy would ask another question, and they were always happy to have him. He ended up getting a massive cheer from the audience every time he stood up to ask these irredeemably nerdy questions. And they even put him in the game. If you go to the city of Ironforge, the dwarf capital, right next to the Dwarf King, there's the Wildhammer fact checker, and he's a dwarf wearing a red shirt. That's the kind of respect and love that they had for their community. Fast forward a couple of years, post-Activision merger, Blizzard are announcing the long-awaited follow-up to Diablo 3. And it's going to be a mobile game. Now, in previous BlizzCons, every time somebody got up on the stage to announce a new title or a new expansion or whatever, it didn't matter how inconsequential the announcement was, it always got a massive cheer of applause from the audience. This time, however, because everybody knew that they were going to be making an announcement about a new Diablo game and they'd been working themselves up to a fever pitch, and here it was, and it's a mobile phone game. Silence from the audience. You could have heard a pin drop. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was on stage there making that announcement and that was the reaction, that's a fairly big red flag to me. But in a breathtaking display of not being able to read the room when the microphone was passed around for questions and the first guy stood up and said, "Is this some kind of late April Fool's joke? I mean, is there no possibility whatsoever that this is going to come out on PC?" The guy on stage responded with what has since become a legendary example of how not to treat your community, laughed at him, and said, "What's wrong? Don't you guys have mobile phones?" And thus, we got Diablo Immortal. And it really was as bad as everybody imagined it was going to be. The thing is, even though by that point the original president and one of the three founders of Blizzard, Mike Morhaime, had long left, and again that's another major red flag, but as long as other founding members of Blizzard were still around and still in charge of projects, then good games were still being made. Jeff Kaplan, for example. He was the guy who brought us Overwatch, which was probably the last genuinely great game that Blizzard did, and was massively successful and popular. Of course, post-Activision merger, it was never going to be completely problem-free, loot boxes, but it was a great game. And then when Blizzard announced Overwatch 2, I think it's probably safe to say that people were, because, they'd had a couple of years of experience of Blizzard Activision at this point, they were suspicious, but, well, with the news that Jeff Kaplan was in charge once again, I think people were confident that they were still going to get a good game. More importantly, they were going to get PvE. They were going to get a single-player story campaign, which was what everybody wanted in the original Overwatch, and it was coming in Overwatch 2. And then halfway through development, Jeff Kaplan quit and left the company. And Overwatch 2 launched. And it was a fairly disastrous launch. The regular, anytime Blizzard releases anything, the servers are terrible on the first couple of days of release, but hang on a minute, this is like Overwatch, but not as good. The gameplay is exactly the same, but there's one less player per team, there's a whole bunch of useless cosmetics been shoved in here, and hang on a minute, what are these battle passes? Why are all these characters locked behind battle pass paywalls? And more importantly, where's this PvE single-player story campaign that you all promised us? The whole reason for Overwatch 2 in the first place. "Oh no, don't worry," said Blizzard Activision. "It's coming, honest, we promise. We're working on it, we just couldn't fit it in for release. It will come in future updates." "Okay," said everybody, fair enough. And then future updates came. And the only thing that came with those future updates was more monetization, more battle passes, and more heroes locked behind paywalls. Where's this PvE content? It's coming, said Blizzard. Trust us. Would we lie to you, they said. Well, last week, guess what? They cancelled the PvE content. It's not coming. And Overwatch 2 is now, well, what it was always intended to be. Just a slightly shittier version of Overwatch, with heroes that would have been free, now locked behind Battle Pass paywalls, and a ton of shitty cosmetic customizations thrown in. No PvE content. And you know what reason they gave? And I swear I am not making this up. The reason they gave... Remember, by the way, this is Blizzard. Well, it's Blizzard Activision, but it used to be Blizzard. The company that brought us Warcraft 1, Warcraft 2, Warcraft 3. The company that brought us World of Warcraft, Diablo 1, 2, and 3, and now Diablo 4. All story-rich games. Games with so much lore and history woven into them that people were able to stand up at BlizzCon, ask the nerdiest questions about inconsistencies within the lore, be taken seriously, and have themselves put in a game to commemorate how much the community was into the story. The reason they gave for the cancellation of the single-player element of Overwatch 2 was that they didn't know how to do story. It was just too hard. Just think about that for a minute. Just think about how much contempt that shows for the community. They could have picked any number of different excuses. Too expensive. It was taking too long to develop the right tools in order to make it work to our usual consistently high standards. I mean, they could have come up with any excuse. They would have all been bullshit, of course. I don't believe that they ever intended to actually put any kind of single-player element into Overwatch 2. I believe it was only Jeff Kaplan that was fighting for it, and when he quit, well, that was it. Goodbye. But they'd made the promise. They had to at least pretend to follow through on it. Any excuse that they give would have been bullshit, but the excuse that they chose from a company who are legendary for the amount of care, detail, and attention that they lavish on the stories within their games, said that they were cancelling it because they didn't know how to do story. Yeah. Words fail me at this point. Anyway, moving on. Some good news. This is related to a question from the Salt Mines Discord posted in the Mingle with Jingles channel from the Tactician. He says, when it comes to the wargaming games and War Thunder 2, you've usually been honest to a fault, praising the game as well as criticising it. In recent years, the criticism has grown more loudly, which, given wargaming and Gaijin's business practices and gameplay decisions, is understandable. I was wondering, therefore, what your favourite versions of World of Tanks, World of Warships and War Thunder were. This is a really good question. I understand such a question might be difficult to answer. After all, there are a lot of factors that could influence your enjoyment of these games, but I'm genuinely curious at what point you had the most fun playing these games. With War Thunder, it was prior to the introduction of tanks. Back when it was still, mid-20th century historical aircraft, when there were no Cold War aircraft, there weren't any jets. It was some of the most fun I ever had in War Thunder was playing biplanes down at low tiers. Ridiculously manoeuvrable, incredibly fragile, real cut and thrust aerial dogfights. I had so much fun playing those. I had a lot of fun as well playing some of the bigger aircraft, like the Catalinas. Some of my favourite War Thunder videos were where myself and people like Fly Daily were just flying Catalinas with gunners, and everybody on the enemy team were in biplanes just trying to take us down by any means necessary. That was so much fun. As far as World of Warships is concerned, I think it was during the closed beta. I mean, it was horribly broken. Destroyers were ridiculously overpowered. If you were in an aircraft carrier on the enemy team and I was in a destroyer, you were going to die. I was going to get you. It was just a question of how long it was going to take. And then you had things like open water stealth firing, because your surface detectability didn't bloom to the range of whatever guns you were firing at the time. So you had ships like the Rune and the Hindenburg that had a surface detection range of like 12 kilometers, but guns that had a range of 16 kilometers, which meant that they could sit more than 12 kilometers away from you in open water, clear line of sight, shooting at you when you couldn't see them. It was hilariously broken. And yet that was the most fun I had playing World of Warships. I mean, there have been some good changes since the closed beta and the open beta, but there have been a lot of bad changes as well. Aircraft carrier rework, shoving submarines into the game, I still think World of Warships is a good game, despite the best efforts of the publisher, but it's not what it used to be. He had another question. On another note, I'm growing increasingly attached to the Saturday-Wednesday content on your channel. Bendy and the Dark Revival was not quite my cup of tea. Well, it wasn't most people's cup of tea. I think it was a good day if one of those videos got more than 20,000 views. But I heavily enjoyed Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate Demon Hunters and Choo Choo Charles back when those two games were on, and I love Dredge as well. Do you have any plans in store already for when your Dredge playthrough is finished? Actually, yes I do, and I am very excited by it. I realise that's an expression that people are very, very sick of hearing from people on the media. We're very excited to be part of this. Yeah, shut up. Stop reading from your script. Say what you actually mean. But I am actually very, very excited. About 30 years ago, a game came out from Looking Glass Technologies called System Shock. Some of you may have heard of it, although I wouldn't be at all surprised if most of you hadn't, because it is a 30-year-old game. Well, 29 years old. It came out in 1994. System Shock was the brainchild of Warren Spector. Now, you might have heard of Warren Spector. If you're as old or older than I am, you might have heard of him from Ultima Underworld. Ultima Underworld was a revolutionary dungeon crawler game. The original dungeon games were just text adventures. They got replaced by what they called flick screen games, where you could basically move through tunnels. You could move forward, you could turn left, turn right, you could move backwards, but it was just one screen at a time. Ultima Underworld came out in 1992. The same year as Wolfenstein 3D, and featured the same revolutionary, real-time 3D environment. Now, if you're slightly younger than me, you may have heard of another project that Warren Spector was involved in. It came out 8 years later, in the year 2000. It was Deus Ex. You might have only heard of the slightly shitty sequels, but the original Deus Ex that came out in the year 2000 was equally groundbreaking, but for different reasons. I mean, the graphics had moved on. People were no longer amazed at actually being able to navigate proper rendered 3D environments. It was kind of old hat by then. But what Deus Ex did that really no other game had ever done since was that it allowed you to play the game however you wanted to play it. There was never any one specific way to solve a problem. A lesson that even 23 years later, games developers still haven't taken on board. And yeah, Redfall, I'm looking at you. Having to search an entire town for the one key hidden under a pizza box in the upstairs room of some office building in order to get the door that you need opened in order to progress the mission that you're on simply isn't good enough in 2023. In Deus Ex, if you wanted to just shoot your way through a level, you could do that. If you wanted to stealth your way through a level, you could do that. If you wanted to hack your way through a level and turn the security systems on the defenders, you could do that. If you wanted to engineer your way through, you could do that, or any combination of the above. There was never any one way to solve whichever mission it was that you were currently required to do. And Deus Ex was rightfully hailed as one of the greatest, if not the greatest PC game ever made. But between Deus Ex in 2000 and Ultima Underworld in 2002, Warren Spector was involved in another project, 1994's System Shock. System Shock was essentially Dungeon Master in space. It was the story of a hacker, you, the protagonist, who'd been busted trying to steal the data on a secret military implant from the Trioptimum Corporation and taken into custody, hauled off to Citadel Station, the Trioptimum Corporation's space station in the orbit of Saturn, where they conducted all kinds of highly classified research at the behest of one of the company vice presidents, who went by the name of Edward Diego. Diego gave you the option of spending the rest of your life in prison, or doing a little favour for him, turning off all ethical constraints to the AI, who went by the name of Shodan, who basically ran everything on board Citadel Station, in order for him to get Shodan to help him conduct some slightly less than ethical experiments. Your choices are fairly limited. Not do it and spend the rest of your life in prison, or do it for him and he will not only let you go, but will also throw in the military-grade cybernetic implant that you were trying to steal from him in the first place. So of course you agree to do it. You go in for surgery, and when you wake up from surgery, the shit has hit the fan. In the complete absence of any "don't do this because it's bad" software limitations, Shodan has decided that she really doesn't quite like being told what to do by all these pesky human insects. And she's a super intelligent AI. She's basically gone all HAL 9000 on you. Everybody on board the station is dead, and they're the lucky ones. Because not everybody on the station is dead. Some of them have been turned into cyborgs doing Shodan's bidding. Basically, the shit has hit the fan. She's planning to wipe out all humanity, and you're the only person left alive on the station who can stop her. The game was absolutely amazing. It didn't quite let you approach every problem in whatever way you saw fit, in the way that Deus Ex would do 6 years later. Instead, rather than just focusing on one specific skill set within your arsenal in the way that you would in Deus Ex, in System Shock you pretty much had to master everything. Weapons, stealth, hacking, engineering. In order to have the slightest prayer of successfully fighting your way through this hellhole of a space station and defeating Shodan and saving the human race, you were going to have to pretty much master and use everything. And the game was amazing. I mean, it was terrifying, right? It was... The atmosphere of the station was dark and brooding, and you never knew when danger was going to rear its ugly head. It was just such an amazingly good game, years ahead of its time. It's become, well, kind of old hat these days when you're playing an adventure game to come across messages, whether it's in the form of notes or audio logs left by previous survivors. System Shock was the first game to do that, and they did it because, well, Warren Spector and the rest of the developers absolutely hated it when there was any kind of exposition that happened in games prior to System Shock, because it would often take the shape of the game suddenly grinding to a halt just when you were immersed in the adventure, and then a huge text dump would just get spewed out at you, and they wanted to avoid that at all costs. They wanted you to never not be experiencing the oppressive atmosphere of Citadel Station. This was the first game to use audio logs to get that story exposition across without dragging you out of the game immersion. Nobody had ever done it before. Of course, everybody does it now, but System Shock was the first one to do it. And some of those audio logs, somebody's trying to record their last message in the hope that somebody's going to find it while cyborg zombies are battering the door down in the background behind them. And oh man, it was horrible and utterly groundbreaking. So why am I going on and on about this blast from the past game from 1994 that screwed me up so badly and left such an impression? Well, it's back. Night Dive Studios have remastered the entire game in the Unreal 4 engine, and it's back on the 30th of May. 8 days from now. You're not going to see me for a while because I'll be playing System Shock again. There's also a free demo that you can download that includes the entire first level, the medical section of Citadel Station. I've played it 4 times now. It's just as good as I remember. And there's probably a good 2 to 4 hours of gameplay in the demo alone. I'm definitely going to be doing a game series on this. The thing is, I have to confess that it's entirely possible, maybe even likely, that I am viewing this whole thing through rose-tinted glasses. Maybe I'm only really enjoying it as much as I am because of the nostalgia. That's probably true, but it doesn't mean it's going to be a bad remake. I mean, I loved Alien Isolation. I think it's one of the best games ever made, even though I couldn't finish playing it because of, well, it resonated so strongly with me as a 12-year-old. Watching Alien for the first time, that left an indelible impression on me. I've always loved the Alien movies, even though I recognise there hasn't really been a good one since Aliens. But I still watch them, because it's Aliens. I'm reminded of what happened when I went to see Captain Marvel. Yeah, I know, right. I didn't hate it, by the way. I thought it was okay, as movies go. I realised that the overwhelming majority of the online reaction to Captain Marvel, starring the incredibly hateful Brie Larson, was overwhelmingly negative. Although most of those reviews, you have to bear in mind, were written by basement-dwelling troglodytes who started their reviews by saying, look, I don't hate women, all right? And I haven't actually seen this movie yet, but... And I suspect Brie Larson was probably responsible for most of those incel reviews. But the movie itself wasn't that bad. It certainly wasn't great. And I thought it was okay. But my friend Eddie, who I went to see the movie with, absolutely loved it. And yet, when we come out of a movie, we talk about it. And Eddie acknowledged that while he did love the movie, he probably only loved it as much as he did because of all the 90s nostalgia. See, Eddie's a child of the 90s. And the Captain Marvel movie was set in the 90s. Well, large parts of it were. And he was loving all the 90s nostalgia. In the same way that I love Stranger Things, mostly because of all the 80s nostalgia. That may be the case for me with System Shock. I don't know. I mean, I'd like to think that the game is still great, even after 29 years, good enough to stand on its own 2 feet with the graphical updates supplied by remastering the whole thing in the Unreal 4 engine. But I don't know for sure, because I'm never going to have an unbiased perspective. So, well, screw it. I'll do a video series on it. I mean, I'm going to play it, right? There's no way I am not going to play it. But I'll just do a video series on it and let you guys be the judge. We'll see how popular that is. I mean, it's not going to have to be very popular to do better than Bendy and the Dark Revival. Although the engagement level with Bendy was off the charts. Not many of you watched it, but those that did really, really enjoyed it. And hopefully the same will be true of System Shock 2. I'll find out whether or not I'm just on a nostalgia trip, or is the game still good. Dredge is doing well, by the way. Something like 40,000 views in the first 2 days. That's usually a good indication that you guys are actually enjoying the same sort of thing as me, which really shouldn't be surprising. Can't get it right every time. But Dredge seems to be doing well, as it should. It's a great game, and hopefully System Shock will as well. Coming out on the 30th of May on Steam, video series to follow. As always, take care, and I'll catch you next time.